you for your patience and welcome. If you just joined us, this is our second session for the day, and we still looking at artificial intelligence, and we always like to look at it from different perspectives, and we believe that as much as AI promises to be effective in helping our businesses. Every AI and ML or any other solution should lead to societal benefit. And we want to look at, AI being all inclusive, and benefiting everyone. Our next speaker is very passionate about community building, preparing people for this disruption. Our next presenter is Jeanette Sawari. She's an AI enthusiast, a software engineer. She's a co-founder of an AI training company inspired by innovative technologies and motivated by the power of community, inclusiveness, and diversity. She's an executive AI consultant, inspiring 50 South Africa 2021 winner. And Jeanette is the co-founding director, head of artificial intelligence for the AI Review. And today she's going to tell us why inclusion matters for the future of AI. Jeanette, welcome. The stage is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you for that amazing introduction, Zenzele. Even I'm surprised that I do some of those things. But today I'm going to be talking about a topic that's very important to me. That's also very critical to how we implement this emerging technology, artificial intelligence, especially within the continent. And my subtitle is going to be Creating a Fair System, because that's the power of inclusion and diversity when applied correctly in artificial intelligence, especially in our corporate spaces. In applying inclusion and diversity in how we implement AI and in how we develop AI products, or how we implement it into our day-to-day understandings as well, which is your education systems and so on, we're preventing racial, age, gender, disability, and other discriminatory vices by humans that will allow us to continue to advance the technology. If Zenzele, you may allow me to proceed to slide 2. I'd like to just give you a little bit of introduction about myself briefly, so you can understand a little bit more about where my perspective is coming from. But I've spent quite a lot of time in East Asia working as an AI consultant, working with different multinational corporates, doing a lot of C-suite training. And from that experience, I realized that there was a need in looking at our ethics, in looking at inclusion and diversity, in the sense that at the core itself of AI, we utilize a lot of data. And some of the data that we were using, some of the data that we were labeling and manipulating and applying to these products was causing problems such as bias. It was causing problems in decision making. Some of them were like your bank loans, or for your autonomous vehicles. There are some decisions that are there, and I realized that there was quite a need, in both sides, customer facing and business facing, for us to understand how we can start to consider inclusion and diversity. I have played numerous roles in 4IR and disruptive technologies. such as through my work in writing. I'm also currently just concluding on my book about AI business strategies in Africa, which I believe will be shared through the platform much later on, as well as my training courses. I think, Senzele, please allow me to go to slide 3. There's a lot to read more about me, and I would love to connect with everyone on LinkedIn. But I think for now, get straight into the presentation since time is of the essence. All right. So it's definitely important that our AI companies remain competent in how they use AI. But most importantly, they have to understand that it doesn't start from the product development. It starts from the building of the teams. It starts with how you approach your hiring process. How do you actually select your team members? What kind of applications do you use? For some corporates, I've done a bit of work where they want to implement an HR system that uses AI that can do a little bit of RPA in there to allow them to be able to automate the process and to be able to screen individuals based on different factors or variables. And even at that stage, you need to consider your ethics. You need to consider what are some of the factors that you are putting in to screen people. Are they fair? Do they matter as well? And who's at the receiving end of all of this? You'll find that you have qualified people that sometimes apply for jobs, and because they're certain race or gender or culture, they will never get the job because it's not actually a human being that's screening the process in the background. So these are some of the problems that you face. And I mentioned the HR one because it's a huge problem, especially on the continent, because these are some of the simpler solutions that I'm seeing companies implementing in their AI production or AI implementation for optimized efficiency kind of programs. So yeah, it's a real problem. Overseas in China, big trends that I've noticed in how AI is being utilized internally would include law, security systems. I mentioned autonomous vehicles earlier, but I won't really get into that because I want to focus on what's happening on ground and what's happening in the continent. And post-COVID, I do believe AI has given us great promise in how we can revitalize or recover economies and economic infrastructure and be able to improve just the general flow of business just by making things a little bit more easier and making sure that AI is for everyone and that everyone is for AI in their understanding. Senzele, please assist me to slide 4. And so with all these issues that I mentioned, how do we actually solve them at a practical level? How do we address the problem? How do we make sure that across all the stages in corporate, everyone understands what inclusion and diversity means? It's a very broad term that's thrown around quite frequently, but I've broken it down into 4. My apologies, I'm just seeing an error that I put 2 3s, but I've broken it down to 4 points here: diversity, transparency, education, and advocacy. But I've also put some notes on the side that I will share with you after these 4 because I believe it's a little bit more than that. So it's important that at the core, when you are putting together your AI lifecycle, you want a multi-diverse group of stakeholders that are from different industries, that have a different understanding, and are not just from different cultures, especially on the industry part, that can be able to develop ideation, design, develop and deploy your products. I will explain a little later why that's also very important. but you want to be able to have people that have different viewpoints and can understand your intersectional data. You want people that have a reference point that's unique from their perspective and can be able to see the social aspect of every decision that is being made, especially from the viewpoint of their academic, critical, or professional understanding. And then transparency is something that is slightly becoming a bit more difficult in addressing the problem, especially when you have things like your Copy Act, or especially when you have to be careful with how you manipulate data, how you extract data, and how you inform the people who you're extracting that data from. So internally and externally, an organization is responsible for how you are transparent in how you develop your AI products or how you invest in your AI projects. I think it's very important to educate your teams on the direction you're taking, on where you're extracting data-like resources from, and how that will impact the process of developing the product, and most importantly to your users. I think it's everyone's responsibility to take part in that educational aspect, like Johan mentioned earlier, that the key is to educate. And if you as a corporate, educate your users, your clients, it becomes much easier in the long term in developing this inclusive culture and developing this diverse opportunity for everyone to be a part of, AI or 4IR as we get into it. And that goes down to company culture as well. Build on equity and build on transparency. Education, which I just mentioned, same thing, build on equity and build on transparency. But most importantly, internally, develop what we call a DEI and inclusion program that's going to allow for policies to last and to be sort of to become legacy projects. I like to use the word legacy because then more and more people will take on this responsibility and will take on this mandate, improve it, and continue to learn from your DEI and inclusion programs. DEI standing for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Finally, advocacy, which is something I do a lot. So I advocate a lot about support. I advocate a lot about different platforms, groups, initiatives, that bring in the marginalized individuals into the space. Diversity for us means a lot of different things, but at the core for me, when I talk about the group of individuals that are marginalized or missing in taking part in this industry, I'm talking about women, and I'm talking about young women, and I'm talking about young African women. We don't see enough, in as much as we have programs like Women in AI, which is global, but we still don't see young African women. When we have programs like, AI for Good, we still don't see young women. And more locally, we have the PC4IR Commission, quite recent, but from that platform, you can also be able to see what our policymakers and our stakeholders, our key stakeholders in government, doing to develop an unbiased, data-driven initiative that will support inclusivity and diversity. Zenzele, please assist to slide 5. So diversity and inclusion, like I mentioned, means quite a lot of things to a lot of different people. And I intentionally put that image up to make it clear that what may be diverse for me will not be diverse for you. But at a larger scope, we all need to play a part. We all need to have a seat at the table in the decision-making process, at the education process, at the education level of AI. Most of the executives that I speak to, they want to understand, what does it mean if you are saying you're going to help us improve our inclusive corporate culture? Sometimes it simply means developing your DEI and inclusion program and maybe structuring that as your corporate social initiative responsibility. and committing to that on a broader scale, but focusing on that specific kind of target that you would consider as a company not inclusive enough, or that's not reflective in the industry, but it also has to be aligned with what you do, what your goals are, what your motivation is, the product you serve, the clients you serve. All of those things play a huge role in defining diversity and inclusion for corporates. I'll just end with a quote that so much of AI and data science is about civil rights. And we think about Black History Month. When we think about Black History Month, we think about legacy and the American legacy that changed the world. As we think about AI, it's an algorithm that can create a legacy. So this is from Renee Cunnings, and she's American. And I thought, from an African scope, what is our legacy when it comes to technology? You know, some people may argue and say we're not the creators of this tech, we're sort of still following and lagging behind. But I think it's within our own responsibility to start taking accountability and start to kind of being the way makers, to open up opportunities for ourselves and to solely define how we are going to do things. So in ending and in closing, thank you very much. Senzele, that'll be slide 6. Thank you very much for your time. If anyone has any questions, feel free, the floor is yours.
Janet, thank you so much. Very important topic there. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think, you know, that's very important, because when you look at AI, it only produces output that is dependent fully on the input. So if the data is already biased, the output is definitely going to be biased. You know, someone said AI should be called artificial dumb, because it cannot operate without human intervention. So in other words, we tell it what to do. If we want it to produce outcomes that reflect the diversity of the society, we can do that. Let me check some questions here. I think Sean is asking, how do we get corporate SA to care for building people? The attitude out there is someone else will develop skills, and then we will push. You know, how do we develop that attitude of us all willing to, you know, dive in and build, you know, people and develop the much needed skills?
Mm-hmm. I think the way we can do that is by making sure, sorry, I have to switch off my camera, but we have to make sure that everyone understands the value in the ecosystem, and that everyone has an opportunity to take part, you know, not just from a corporate perspective, but more especially in academia. We need to, you know, take it upon ourselves within the private sector to align with policymakers and help them to understand that, you know, when you're building, you have to align socially for you to have greater value within the ecosystem, and to also be able to capitalize on that as businesses.
Janet, thank you so much. We are a little bit behind schedule. We will take a short break, and we will look at AI for operational excellence. And Vukosi Sambo will take us through the next presentation. Thank you so much. We'll see you in less than a minute.